Imagine holding a loaded rifle. In front of you is an unarmed goat herder. Behind him is the absolute certainty of your death. If you pull the trigger, you go to a federal prison, condemned by politicians sitting in air-conditioned offices who have never smelled gunpowder. This is not a hypothetical ethics class. This is June 28, 2005. It is the exact moment the military justice system completely failed Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell. We love to glorify the medals. We make Hollywood movies about the heroism, but we actively sanitize the grotesque reality of what it actually takes to survive. This is the true story of a shattered spine, a desperate 7-mile crawl through enemy territory, and the brutal, unforgiving truth that sometimes bureaucracy is deadlier than enemy bullets. The Hindu Kush mountain range does not care about your training. It does not care about your trident, your elite status, or the flag on your shoulder. At 10,000 feet above sea level, the air is thin, the rocks are sharp as glass, and the cold cuts through bone. It is an ancient, hostile terrain that has swallowed entire empires whole. On a dark, moonless night in the summer of 2005, 4 men from SEAL Team 10 were dropped into this abyss. Their mission was Operation Red Wings. The objective sounded clinically simple on a briefing room whiteboard: locate and gather intelligence on a high-level Taliban-aligned militia leader named Ahmad Shah. The 4 men, Lieutenant Michael Murphy, Petty Officer Second Class Danny Dietz, Petty Officer Second Class Matthew Axelson, and Petty Officer First Class Marcus Luttrell, were lethal, precise, and bonded by a brotherhood forged in the fires of Coronado. But military intelligence had vastly underestimated the reality on the ground. They were told Shah had a small, poorly armed contingent. They were told the terrain would offer concealment. Both were catastrophic miscalculations by a command structure that relied too heavily on satellite imagery and too little on the harsh, unpredictable variables of the Afghan wilderness. They set up an observation post on the slopes of Sar. The sun rose, baking the rocky ridges, and then the ultimate nightmare of any reconnaissance team materialized. It wasn't a patrol of hardened insurgents. It wasn't an ambush. It was 3 local goat herders stepping directly into the SEALs' concealed position. 100 unwritten rules of warfare collided with the strict, unyielding rules of engagement dictating American military operations. This is the agonizing crux of the tragedy. Luttrell and his brothers were not paralyzed by fear. They were paralyzed by the law. The herders were unarmed civilians. If the SEALs executed them to preserve the mission and their own lives, they would face murder charges. They would be court-martialed, stripped of their honor, and thrown into Leavenworth by a military tribunal and a media circus that would never understand the visceral terror of Sar. They took a vote. Driven by the moral and legal constraints placed upon them by men who make war from desks, Lieutenant Murphy made the fateful call. They let the herders go. If you are watching this and wondering how a system can force its greatest warriors to choose between their own lives and a prison sentence, hit the like button right now. Because what happens next is a devastating testament to the cost of those bureaucratic rules. Within an hour, the mountainside erupted. The herders had predictably alerted Ahmad Shah's militia. The SEALs were not facing a small contingent. They were facing an overwhelming force of heavily armed, combat-hardened fighters maneuvering with the high ground advantage. The air was instantly shredded by the deafening roar of AK-47s, PKM machine guns, and RPG-7s. The sheer volume of fire was not a tactical engagement. It was an execution by lead and fire. The SEALs had no cover. The mountain offered nothing but sheer drops and loose shale. Their only option was to fall back, which meant throwing themselves off the edge of the cliffs. Forget what you see in action movies. When a human body plummets down a jagged mountainside, it does not roll gracefully. It breaks. Bones snap. Equipment tears away. Flesh is shredded by rocks. Luttrell and his team threw themselves into the void, tumbling hundreds of feet down the mountain, crashing into boulders, sustaining concussions, shattered limbs, and massive internal trauma, all while continuing to return fire. Danny Dietz was shot in the hand, his thumb blown off. Then he was shot in the back, then the neck. Yet he kept firing. He kept trying to establish radio communication, bleeding out on the rocks, refusing to drop his weapon until his body simply could no longer function. Matthew Axelson was shot in the chest and the head. With a horrific head wound, his eyes blinded by his own blood, he continued to engage the enemy with terrifying precision, burning through his magazines, asking Luttrell for more ammo, fighting with the feral desperation of a man who knows he is already dead. Lieutenant Michael Murphy, realizing they were completely cut off and that the terrain blocked all satellite communications, made a decision that earned him the Medal of Honor, but cost him his life. He deliberately stepped out of the minimal cover he had. He walked directly into the open, fully exposing himself to the relentless hail of enemy fire, just to get a clear signal on his satellite phone to call for the quick reaction force. He took a bullet to the back. He dropped the phone. He picked it back up, finished the call, signed off with "thank you," and continued fighting until he was killed. Marcus Luttrell was blown over another ridge by the concussive shockwave of a rocket-propelled grenade. The blast knocked him unconscious. When he finally opened his eyes, the mountain was eerily quiet. The gunfire had stopped. The screaming had stopped. His brothers were gone. Luttrell was alone. His pants had been blown off by the blast. His back was broken in several places. His pelvis was fractured. He had a bullet wound in his leg, multiple shrapnel wounds tearing into his flesh, and he had bitten entirely through his tongue, choking on his own blood. He was paralyzed from the waist down, temporarily pinned to the dirt by the massive trauma to his spinal cord. If this raw, unfiltered reality of what these men endured has impacted you, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We don't sugarcoat history here. We tell the truth about what it costs to wear the uniform. Stay with me, because Luttrell's nightmare was only just beginning. For hours, Luttrell lay in the dirt, waiting for the paralysis to recede, waiting for the enemy to find him and execute him. When feelings slowly, agonizingly returned to his legs, he faced an impossible reality. He was 7 miles away from the nearest potential safe zone. He had no radio, almost no water, and a body that was medically failing. To walk was impossible. To stand was agony. He had only one option: to crawl. This is the part of the story that defies medical science and human limits. Marcus Luttrell began to crawl, inch by inch. He used his elbows, dragging his dead weight across the jagged rocks, leaving a trail of his own blood. Thirst became a weapon more lethal than the Taliban. His mouth was so dry, his throat so swollen that he couldn't swallow. At one point, hallucinating from blood loss, dehydration, and sheer pain, he found a stagnant, muddy puddle under a rock. He scooped the filthy, parasite-ridden mud into his mouth just to feel moisture, desperate to keep his internal organs from shutting down. The psychological warfare inside his own mind was deafening. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Murphy, Axelson, and Dietz. The survivor's guilt was a crushing weight, heavier than the broken spine he was dragging. Why was he alive? Why had the RPG thrown him clear while his brothers were slaughtered? In the darkness, alone on a hostile mountain, Luttrell took his combat knife and physically drew a line in the dirt. He told himself he only had to crawl to that line. Once he reached it, he drew another. He broke his survival down into inches because thinking about miles would have shattered his mind completely. Then he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Luttrell braced himself for the end. He readied his weapon, prepared to die fighting. But the men who found him were not Ahmad Shah's fighters. It was an Afghan villager named Muhammad Gulab, accompanied by other men from the nearby village of Salar Ban. What happened next is a profound critique of everything we think we know about this war. The American military system, with all its billions of dollars, its satellites, and its strict rules of engagement, had abandoned Luttrell to die on that mountain. But an impoverished Afghan goat herder, a man with nothing, chose to save him. Gulab recognized that Luttrell was an American, heavily wounded and hunted. By taking him in, Gulab was placing a massive target on his own back and on his entire village. Gulab was bound by an ancient, sacred tribal code known as Pashtunwali, specifically the tenet of Nanawatai, which demands that asylum must be granted to anyone who requests it, even an enemy, and the host must protect the guest to the death. If you are fascinated by the incredible clash of cultures here, where an ancient tribal code showed more honor and protection than the rigid bureaucracy of modern warfare, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think about Gulab's impossible choice. Gulab and his men carried the shattered Navy SEAL down the mountain, hiding him in their village. They cleaned his wounds, gave him water, and clothed him. When the Taliban inevitably arrived, heavily armed and demanding that the village hand over the American, Gulab stood in front of them and refused. He looked the militia in the eye and told them they would have to kill every man in the village before they touched his guest. The bravery of this single Afghan villager stands as a stark contrast to the politicians who wrote the rules that put Luttrell in that situation to begin with. While Luttrell was fighting for his life in Salaban, another tragedy had already unfolded in the skies above. When Murphy's final satellite call had reached headquarters, the quick reaction force was scrambled. An MH-47 Chinook helicopter, call sign Turbine 33, heavily loaded with 8 Navy SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers, was sent to rescue Team 10. But command sent them in without the standard Apache attack helicopter escorts, a fatal tactical error driven by a desperate rush to save the men on the ground. As Turbine 33 approached the landing zone, Ahmad Shah's forces were waiting. An RPG struck the helicopter's rear rotor. The massive aircraft lost control and plummeted into the ravine, killing all 16 men on board instantly. It was the single largest loss of life for naval special warfare since World War II. Luttrell did not know this while he was hiding in Gulab's village. He did not know that his survival had inadvertently cost the lives of 16 more brothers. When U.S. Army Rangers and Green Berets finally reached the village of Salaban days later, extracting Luttrell and bringing him back to an American base, the full, crushing weight of the reality was placed upon him. Marcus Luttrell survived. His body slowly healed. His broken back fused, his wounds scarred over. He was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions on Sortalo Sar. But the true cost of Operation Red Wings is not something you can pin to a uniform. The military bureaucracy loves to frame this as a story of ultimate American resilience. They use Luttrell's survival as a testament to SEAL training, but beneath the patriotic music and the congressional handshakes lies a much darker, much more painful truth. Luttrell's survival is a story of systemic failure. It is the story of rules of engagement drafted by lawyers that forced men to choose between their lives and their freedom. It is the story of command decisions that sent an unescorted helicopter into a deadly ambush. Marcus Luttrell crawled 7 miles with a broken back. He survived hell, but he brought the ghosts of 19 dead Americans back with him. The medals do not bring back Michael Murphy, Danny Dietz, or Matthew Axelson. They do not bring back the crew of Turbine 33. The true heroism of Marcus Luttrell is not just that he survived the mountain. It is that he wakes up every single day, carrying the unbearable weight of being the only one who made it home and still finds the strength to speak their names. If this documentary changed the way you view the reality of war, hit the subscribe button and share this video. We are dedicated to tearing down the myths and telling the absolute truth about history's most harrowing moments. Leave a comment in honor of the men of Operation Red Wings. Until next time, remember that the true cost of freedom is never free, and it is rarely pretty.